Fam, let's talk about your favorite paper, aside from the Washington Post. Weigel, she loves the New York Times here, right, fam?
Yeah,
I used to love
do.
the New York Times until they pushed the Iraq War.
Yeah.
And they really aided George Bush and his whole cabinet and all the neocons then to get us into the war. And a lot of Democrats, a lot of people like Hillary Rodham Clinton, Joe Biden, they all came aboard and came to Iraq. But now, what are they doing now, fam? Where else are they pushing for regime change?
So if you guys recall, there was regime change in Bolivia, and they forced the Bolivian president to pretty much flee to Mexico. Okay, and this is Evo Morales. Now, we know that in Latin America, we've had our share of socialist type of presidents and socialist type of countries pretty much be pushed out by the Western Empire. And so we remember that Morales was pushed out by this woman who was had a Nazi-like force behind her. They terrorized, brutalized, murdered some of the protesters, ran his whole cabinet out, completely replaced them. And then we found out that there was people like Marco Rubio and Donald Trump in talks and pushing this regime. Well, it turns out that the New York Times and, of course, mainstream media have also been lying about this. They lied about the accuracy and the validity of the elections, and it's just hilarious in retrospect because nobody has invaded this country and said, oh, we have to go spread democracy in America because their elections aren't valid, the people aren't being taken care of,
the OAS,
and they're in
fam.
poverty. Fam, exactly, the OAS.
Cory Booker says he stands behind the OAS. And this is why you got to be, it's a slippery slope when you get people who come in and say they're fighting for racial equality, but yet they'll stand behind the OAS, which is a NGO that's been just as nefarious as the NED. These are regime change light aficionados. And when you stand behind imperialism, is there anything more racist, fam, than going with our imperialist ways when we just go around and killing people of color, indigenous people in their homeland? Is there anything more racist than that? No.
And I'm just going to read a couple parts from here. This is right under the picture of the woman. It says, given all irregularities observed, it is impossible to guarantee the integrity of the data and certify the accuracy of the results. This is what the OAS announced on November 10th, as the country was in turmoil over the election. The next day, Morales, under the threat of force to him and his family, boarded a plane to Mexico where he was granted asylum. The final OAS report in December claimed that the audit team has detected willful manipulation of the results based on incontrovertible evidence of an electoral process marred by grave irregularities. So like Pasta said, they were saying that this was irregular. And then that Sunday, the New York Times published an article strongly suggesting that it was the OAS audit, not the Bolivian election, that was marred by grave irregularities, making it impossible to guarantee the integrity of the data and certify the accuracy of the OAS claims. The paper of record summarized its reporting this way. A close look at the Bolivian election data suggested initial analysis by OAS that raised questions of vote rigging and helped force out a president was flawed. This is the OAS, the New York Times saying now, contradicting what they said during that time. They're trying to wash their hands of this.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really hilarious to see.
And it's the mechanism, once again, of imperialism right here. Okay, listen, Donald Trump wanted this to happen. Okay, we might not have evidence that he was behind it, whatnot. We certainly have evidence that Rubio was behind it, but it was all about what? The lithium fields, right?
Yep.
That the Chinese had made a contract bid on and
Right
received it, right?
Yes.
So are you going to read this here? I'm so sorry, please, because I didn't mean to step on your toes.
No, you're fine. Just they were just talking what Pasta was saying, the shifting power in lithium-rich Bolivia to the white Christian you have subservient right. This is what it was all about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was stealing the natural resources, and that's what happened. But we use these mechanisms like the OAS, the NED, all these mechanisms, all these NGOs are so awful. They're so sinister in what they do. They're really there to just push imperialism. Why doesn't the OAS come over here and detect our elections and say our elections are shit? Why are people buying this shit? I hate when I see neocons or Republicans say, well, look, their elections weren't fair.
Yeah.
We have to make sure they're a democratic system over there. What about our own fucking system?
Yeah,
oh, Mom, I'm sorry.
It's so hypocritical.
What about our own fudging system?
Pompeo was behind also pushing the
Of course
OAS,
he
recommending
was.
this, to ensure a democratic process representative of the people's will. The credibility of the electoral system must be restored. This is how fucking, I'm sorry,
love this
hilarious.
rock, Johnny.
I just cannot. What about, look what just happened.
Johnny, I gotta get Johnny's opinion.
Throughout this whole primary.
Johnny, your opinions on Secretary Pompeo's statement about finding the OAS official report recommending new elections in Bolivia, Johnny?
Yeah, he's the worst. I mean, there's not much to say. He's the fucking worst. I mean, Housing in a position of power.
Yeah. Well, that's because we don't care about our elections over here. People just take them as actual proof of the actual people's words. You want to dig into our elections? Oh, my Lord, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, my Lord. We shouldn't be worried about elections anywhere. We should be worried about our elections at home.
And, of course, the countries like the New York Times, they did this, of course, during the war in Iraq. Papers like the New York Times did this, of course, during the war in Iraq. The Washington Post has done this. They do this all the time when it comes to foreign policy. And
we're doing it in Hong Kong right now with the NED.
Right.
The NED is up all the Decency Hong Kong Freedom Act of bullshit, and has all NED advisories on their board.
Yeah. And I'm just going to read the last part of it. Towards the end. Yet those reasons for doubting the OAS accusations were barely ever even mentioned, let alone vested with credibility by the U.S. media or its leading foreign policy commentators. Instead, as the MIT scholars wrote in the Washington Post, quote, the media largely reported the allegations of fraud as fact. That's because whenever it comes to changing a foreign country's government that is disliked by the U.S. media reflexively sides with the U.S. State Department and seizes to report and instead engages in pro-government propaganda. In this case, Bolivia lost its most successful president in modern history and consequently now ruled by an unelected military junta, all cheered on by the U.S. and its media, relying on an OAS report, which even the New York Times is now forced to acknowledge is at best deeply flawed. Thus, did the U.S. government and its media yet again help destroy a thriving Latin American democracy. So obviously, that is how we do this.
During Evo Morales' tenure, reduced the poverty rate by 42%, reduced extreme poverty rate by 60%. Income per person has increased by more than double of Latin American average under Evo Morales. The literacy rate dropped from 13 to 2.4% under Evo. Unemployment went from 9.2 to 4.1, and it was still one of the fastest growing countries as pertaining to GDP. Evo was the first indigenous leader of Bolivia. So if you believe for 1 second that those election results that the OAS was saying was fugazi, then you got another thing coming. This guy was so liked by his people. He was loved by his people. And what did he do, fam, when they ousted him? He told his people to be peaceful.
He did.
To be peaceful. And you know what? He also talked about he has some politicians that have followed him in the pipeline coming, some young Evos. Hopefully they can come up and maybe rule. Maybe rule one day. If they don't mess with their elections. We know they will.